For 19 years, I commanded men who would take a bullet for me. My own father still introduced me as the coffee secretary. My name is Amelia Riley. I'm a rear admiral in the United States Navy, and that morning at Coronado, my father handed me a burnt piece of bread while my brother got the good steak. He tossed my ID card onto the floor of the rental car without even glancing at it. He made me carry the bags like hired help. He had no idea what that card actually said. Here's what he didn't know yet. In 6 hours, 200 Navy SEALs would be standing at attention in that auditorium, and a 3-star general was about to say my real rank out loud in front of every single one of them. I watched my father's face go pale as, one by one, 200 men rose to their feet and saluted me. If you've ever been the invisible one in your own family, the one nobody thought was worth watching, stay with the story. Because before you judge my father, you need to hear what happened at Thanksgiving in 2010, the year he called me heartless. But first, let's go back to the parking lot, 6 hours before any of that happened. Growing up in the Riley house on Delmar Street, there were 2 kinds of men my father respected. Men who bled for their country, and men who bled for their country and lived to talk about it at the VFW every Friday night. Everyone else, in Frank Riley's ledger, was just filling space. I was born in 1982, in Jacksonville, North Carolina, 6 months after my father came home from his second tour. He came home with a purple heart, a limp he refused to explain, and a silence that filled our house like water fills a glass. My mother, Diane, told me once that the silence wasn't cruelty. It was a man trying to hold something together with both hands and not having any left over for talking. Caleb was born 4 years after me. From the day he could walk, my father watched him differently. I remember being 8 years old, standing in the driveway while my father taught 6-year-old Caleb how to march. Left, right, left. Chin up. Shoulders back. I stood on the porch steps with a stack of homework in my arms, and I asked if I could learn too. Go help your mother, my father said, without turning around. This isn't for you. I went inside. I didn't cry. I want to be clear about that because for years I told myself I didn't feel anything at all. That's not true. I felt it the way you feel a splinter you've decided not to dig out, small, buried, and always there when you press down. By the time I was in high school, the pattern had a name in our house, even if nobody said it out loud. Caleb was the future. I was the backup plan. When I brought home a report card with 5 A's, my father glanced at it, set it on the kitchen counter, and said, "Good. Grades will get you a desk job somewhere." When Caleb brought home a B in gym class because he'd sprained his ankle wrestling a boy twice his size, my father took him out for ice cream. I joined the Navy in 2000, 3 weeks after I turned 18. I didn't announce it at a family dinner. I signed the paperwork at a recruiting office in Wilmington on a Tuesday afternoon and told my parents that Friday, standing in the kitchen with my hands flat on the counter so they wouldn't shake. My father looked up from his newspaper. Doing what? Communications, to start, I said. It wasn't a lie yet. It would become one. Huh, he said, and went back to the paper. That was the whole conversation. What he never asked, what nobody in my family ever thought to ask for almost 2 decades, was what I actually did. And the truth is, after my 3rd year in, I couldn't have told him even if he'd asked. I moved into intelligence, then into joint special operations planning. By 2006, I was working assignments I couldn't describe to my own mother over the phone, in rooms where the walls themselves were classified. By 2010, the year that matters most to the story, I was running operations that put me on a cot in a field hospital outside Kandahar with a bullet fragment still lodged half an inch from my spine. None of them knew any of it, because I couldn't tell them, and then, later, because I didn't. That's the part one needs you to understand. The lie didn't start as a lie. It started as classification, and somewhere along the way, I can't tell you, quietly became, I won't tell you. I remember calling home from the hospital in Landstuhl, 3 days after the surgery, my left arm still useless in a sling I didn't mention. My father picked up. "You still doing paperwork?" he asked. "Something like that," I said. "Good," he said. "Steady work. Not everybody's cut out for the field." He hung up before I could say anything else. I lay back against the pillow, stared at the ceiling tile, and let him believe it. I made captain in 2015. My family didn't know. I pinned on my first star in 2021 in a ceremony with 11 people in the room, none of them named Riley. My mother thought the promotion I mentioned once on the phone was a raise. Then, on a Tuesday morning this past March, my phone rang while I was reviewing a briefing folder in my office at the Pentagon. It was my mother. "Caleb's graduating," she said, and I could hear something bright and nervous in her voice, the way she always sounded when she was excited, and trying not to upset your father by sounding too excited. Bud/S. He made it through Hell Week, Amelia. He's going to be a SEAL. I set my pen down. That's incredible. Your father wants the whole family there. Coronado, in June. He's already telling everyone at the hardware store. She paused, and the brightness dimmed just slightly. It would mean a lot if you came. "I'll be there," I said, and I meant it, and some old, small part of me, the part still standing on those porch steps with homework in her arms, wondered whether this, finally, might be the day my father looked at one of his children and saw me too. My mother's voice dropped lower before we hung up, quieter than the rest of the call, like she'd stepped into another room. "Come home, honey. But don't tell your father you know." I stood there with the phone against my ear long after the line went dead, staring at the folder on my desk, and I found myself wondering something I had never once let myself ask out loud. How much did my mother actually know? I answered nothing that night, but I found something. Not an answer, a decision. I would go to Coronado, and I would go the way I had learned to go everywhere that mattered to my family. Small. The plane touched down at Lindbergh Field at 4:40 in the afternoon. I wore a gray cardigan over a plain white shirt, jeans, flat shoes. Nobody on that plane would have looked at me twice, which was the point. Ray Osment met me at baggage claim in civilian clothes too, a windbreaker zipped to his chin, and he took my one duffel bag before I could stop him. "Sir, permission to speak freely." "Denied," I said, and almost smiled. He fell into step beside me anyway. "You want me at the hotel or off-site?" "Off-site. You stay at the vacation inn on Orange Avenue, not with us. If my father asks who you are, you're a friend from DC driving down for the graduation. You do not say Navy. You do not say aide. You do not say anything with a number in front of it." I stopped at the rental counter and looked at him. Nobody finds out what I am until I decide they find out. "Are we clear, petty officer?" "Clear." His jaw worked like he was chewing on something bitter. "Doesn't mean I like it." My phone buzzed in my pocket before I could answer him. I glanced down. A 2 stars office line. Michael Vance's aide requesting a callback before Friday. I silenced it and put the phone face down on the counter. Ray saw the screen. He said nothing, but his eyes flicked from the phone to me and back, filing it away. "Understood," he said finally and picked up my bag again. We drove separately to the hotel near the base, a low stucco building with a parking lot that smelled like diesel and sea salt. I pulled in at 6:15, and my father was already outside, standing beside my mother's rental car with his arms crossed, wearing the same navy windbreaker he'd worn to every family event since I was in college. "You're late," he said, before I'd even gotten the door open. "Traffic on the 5. Everybody hits traffic on the 5. Some people leave earlier." He looked at my rental car, then at me, then jerked his chin toward the trunk. "Well, don't just stand there. Get the bags." There were 3 suitcases in that trunk, his, my mother's, and Caleb's spare gear bag, because Caleb was already checked into base housing with his BUD/S class and couldn't carry it himself. I set my own duffel down on the asphalt and started pulling out the others. One of the wheels on my mother's suitcase was broken. It dragged sideways, and I had to angle my whole body to keep it moving straight. "Amelia Riley, is that you?" I looked up. A heavy-set man in a Padres cap was crossing the lot toward my father, grinning, and my father's whole face changed the way it always did around an audience. Brighter, looser, performing. Walt Doggett, I'll be damned." My father grabbed his hand and pumped it. "What are the odds?" "I told Carol," I said. "That's Frank Riley's rig if I ever saw one." Walt looked past him at me, still bent over the suitcases. "This your girl?" "That's Amelia." My father said it the way you'd introduce a chair. "Works out in DC." Doing what these days? I straightened up, one suitcase handle in each hand, sweat already at my hairline. Before I could answer, my father answered for me. Oh, she's coffee secretary, basically. Some office over there. Types up memos. Keeps the calendar. He laughed, a short bark. Nothing like her brother. Caleb's graduating BUD/S Friday. 26 weeks of pure hell, and he made it through on the first try. Walt whistled, impressed, already turning his attention fully toward my father. No kidding. I stood there holding 40 pounds of luggage in 90-degree heat and said nothing, because saying something would have required explaining 20 years in 6 seconds, and I had promised Ray, that I would not. I carried the bags into the lobby. Behind me I heard my father's voice, still rolling, telling Walt about Caleb's PT scores, about the obstacle course record, about a boy he had watched become exactly what he himself had once wanted to be and never was. Not one word more about me. Ray was 30 feet away, leaning against a concrete pillar near the ice machine, watching. I caught his eye for half a second. His hand was closed around the strap of his own bag, so tightly the canvas had gone white across his knuckles, and his mouth was a flat line. I gave him nothing. Not a nod, not a look that meant anything. That was the deal. Inside, I set the suitcases down by the front desk and rolled my shoulder where the strap had bitten in. My father came through the automatic doors behind me, still talking to Walt, who had followed him inside to keep the conversation going. Come on, Walt, my father said, clapping him on the shoulder, already turning toward the hotel bar. Let me buy you a beer before the wife notices I'm gone. As Frank turned away, Walt lingered a moment, his eyes tracking back to me. The set of my shoulders, the way my feet had planted themselves square without my telling them to. 20 years of standing in formation does that to a body. It doesn't ask permission. He frowned, tilting his head. Huh, he said. You stand like a soldier, you know that? My father, halfway to the bar, threw his head back and laughed. Her? She stands like she's waiting for the bus. He waved a hand and kept walking, already forgetting he'd said it. I stood there in the lobby with my mother's broken suitcase leaning against my leg, and I did not move. The steakhouse Frank picked was called The Anchor, 3 miles from the base, the kind of place with ship's wheels bolted to the walls and a hostess who called every man sir and every woman hon. I got hon. Caleb got a table by the window. I set the broken suitcase strap I'd been carrying since the lobby down by my chair and said nothing about it. The waiter brought the tray to the head of the table first, out of habit, out of instinct, out of whatever training service industry workers absorb about who to serve first at a table like ours. Frank redirected him with one finger. Give the ribeye to my son, he said. He's earning it tomorrow. Caleb glanced at me. I shook my head, small, before he could offer to swap. He didn't. Not because he wouldn't have. I'd learn that later, upstairs in the dark, but because Frank was already talking, and Frank talking was like weather. You didn't interrupt it. You waited it out. What landed in front of me was a chicken breast, dry at the edges, and a piece of bread that had gone past toasted into something closer to char. I picked it up, burnt on one side, soft on the other. I turned it over so the burnt side faced down and started eating from the good half. That's fitting, actually, Frank said, watching me do it. Desk job. Burnt toast. Same category. Something that got left in too long, and nobody noticed. Diane's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. She didn't say anything either. She never did, not at the table, not with him in this mood, the mood I recognized from 30 years of dinners like this one, the mood where he needed an audience for the version of himself that still mattered. He gave us Vietnam. Not the parts that would have made me understand him. I'd have taken those, I'd have leaned into those, but the parts that made him the last man standing at a checkpoint outside Pleiku, the sergeant who pulled 2 guys out of a truck fire with his bare hands, the 20-year-old who came home to a country that spat on him at the airport. Some of it I believed. Some of it grew a little each time I heard it, the way stories do when they're the only thing left holding a man upright. Dad, I said when there was a gap. Actually, this year I was part of a joint task force that. Nobody wants to hear about your memos, Amelia. He didn't even look at me when he said it. He was cutting his own steak, and the knife made a small sound against the plate, metal on ceramic, and that sound was somehow louder than the sentence. Caleb's about to be a SEAL. You want to talk shop, talk about that. I closed my mouth around the rest of the sentence and swallowed it with the chicken. You know what your problem's always been, he went on, pointing his fork at me now, is you never came home. Thanksgiving, what was it, 2010? Your mother crying at the table. Caleb was what, 16? And you couldn't be bothered to pick up a phone. Too busy. Always too busy. He shook his head like he was disappointed in a stranger. Married to the job. Doesn't care about her own family. That's what you are. I looked at my plate. I did not tell him where I actually was that Thanksgiving, in a bed at Landstuhl with 41 stitches in my side, unable to hold a phone steady enough to dial. That story wasn't his to have yet. Not at this table. Not with Walt's laugh still sitting in my chest from an hour ago. I hear you, I said instead, and ate the burnt bread. Diane reached under the table and put her hand on my knee. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The parking lot outside was still holding the day's heat, 90 degrees even after dark, the air thick enough that my shirt stuck to my back on the walk to the car. Frank hummed along to something on AM radio the whole ride, pleased with himself, full of ribeye and old war stories, and I was digging in my bag for my room key when my wallet slid sideways and my military ID slipped out onto the floor mat between the front and back seats. Frank reached down and got it before I could. He held it up to the streetlight coming through the window, turning it over once, twice, his thumb brushing right across the 2 silver stars stamped into the corner. I watched his face in the rear-view mirror. Nothing. Not a flicker. What is this, your building badge? He snorted. Christ, they give you a laminated card just to get into the parking garage now. Fancy. He tossed it back over his shoulder without looking. It hit the floor mat and slid under the front seat. I unbuckled and leaned down for it in the dark, my fingers finding the edge of the plastic, and when I sat back up my hand was not quite steady. I put the card back in my wallet card first, so the stars faced in, and I didn't say a word about what it actually was. That was when Caleb, beside me in the back seat, leaned close enough that I could feel his breath near my ear. Amelia, he whispered, barely audible under the radio, I need to tell you something before tomorrow. I turned my head toward him. Frank's hand shot for the volume knob at that exact moment, and the radio surged up loud enough to rattle the door panel, some classic rock chorus swallowing whatever Caleb had been about to say next. The music was still bleeding out the door speaker when Frank pulled into the hotel lot, cut the engine, and went inside without a word about tomorrow's schedule. Nobody argued. Diane went straight up to the room with her sandals in her hand. I told Caleb I'd see him at 6 for the run he still insisted on doing before his own graduation, and I went to my room and did not sleep more than 90 minutes, the way I hadn't in years. At 5:52 the knock came, not on my door but 2 doors down, soft 3 taps. I stepped into the hallway in running shorts and found Caleb already there, dressed, but standing still instead of stretching. You're not lacing up, I said. I need 5 minutes. His voice was low, pitched for the hallway and nobody else. The carpet runner smelled like industrial cleaner and old coffee from the lobby below. Before Dad's up. Before today. I leaned against the wall, arms crossed, the way I do in briefings when I already suspect the news is bad. Talk. He rubbed the back of his neck, a habit from when he was 9, and had broken something. 2 years ago. Second phase before I even got orders here. One of the instructors, Master Chief Alvarez, he was running us through a debrief on a joint op, some redacted case study, and he said a name. Said it like it was scripture. Caleb looked at the carpet. He said, Admiral Riley wrote the book on this extraction. Woman doesn't miss. I didn't move. Somewhere below us, a maid's cart will squeaked down the hall, then stopped. I didn't think anything of it, Caleb said. Riley's not exactly rare. But then he mentioned Kandahar. The year. And I did the math in my head, standing there in a wet cami top, and he exhaled. It landed. I went back to my rack that night and looked up what I could, which wasn't much, because most of it's blacked out. But enough. 2 years, I said. Flat. Not a question. 2 years. He finally looked up. I never told Dad. I never told Mom. I never told you I knew. Why? He flinched at the word like I'd thrown something. Because you never told me. Because if you'd wanted us to know, you'd have said something. And because his jaw worked. Because Dad worships me for this, Amelia. You know what that's like, being the reason he gets up in the morning? Being the son who finally made him not a failure? If I'd said it out loud, if I told him his coffee secretary outranks half the men he salutes at the VFW, I don't know what that does to him. I was scared to find out. I thought about all the years I'd built a private ledger against my brother. Every dinner where he got the good cut and I got the burn end. Every framed photo on the mantle that was him in dress blues and none of me in anything at all. And I had filed him as a co-conspirator. Silent, comfortable, benefiting. It had never once occurred to me that he was carrying his own version of my exact weight, just aimed a different direction. You should have told me you knew, I said, quieter now. 2 years of watching him hand me burnt toast, knowing what you knew. You think I liked it? His voice cracked on the second word, and he caught it, brought it back down. I used to leave the table. You never noticed because you were too busy not reacting. I'd go stand in the garage, so I didn't have to watch you eat crusts while he cut me a piece the size of my hand. Neither of us said anything for a moment. A door opened somewhere down the hall, then closed again, not ours. Let me tell him, Caleb said suddenly. Today. Before the ceremony. I'll do it myself. I'll take whatever he throws at me. No. Amelia. It's your graduation, Caleb. Not my reveal. I am not going to walk into the one day you've earned since BUD/S and turn it into the day Dad finds out his daughter outranks him. I said it steady, the command voice, the one that ends discussions in a briefing room. It did not end this one. Caleb studied me the way he used to when he was small and knew I was lying about something being fine. Then he said the thing that stopped my breath entirely. You don't understand. He glanced toward the stairwell door like Frank might materialize through it. The general presiding today, the one putting the trident on my chest in 6 hours. You really think he's not going to recognize you? I stood there in the hallway carpet smell and the dying hum of the ice machine and realized I had never once, in 3 weeks of planning this trip down to the last false detail, asked anyone the one question that mattered. I had never asked who was pinning the wings. I did not ask it. I put my hand on the door frame instead, and Caleb watched my face do the thing it does before a briefing, the flattening. Doesn't matter, I said. I'll be at the back. Nobody points a camera at the back. He didn't believe me. Neither did I. We drove to the base gate at 0730, Frank in the front seat of the rental beside me, Diane and Caleb behind. The morning had already burned off its cool and settled into the same wet 90 degrees as the day before. Guard shacks line the entrance to Naval Base Coronado, striped arms up, a young sailor in dress whites working the near lane with a handheld scanner, waving cars through 2 at a time. Frank had his window down, elbow out, telling the sailor before he'd even asked that his son was graduating BUD/S today, class 331, top of the log PT scores. The sailor smiled the way people smile at fathers like Frank. Congratulations, sir. IDs, please. Diane handed hers over. Caleb handed his. Frank handed his own retired veteran card like a badge he'd waited 40 years to use again. Then it was my turn. I gave him the blue card. 2 silver stars on a field, my photo, my name in block letters. I had reissued it 8 months ago and never once used it around my family because around my family, I did not exist as the person on that card. The sailor scanned it. I watched his face change before he said anything, which is a thing you learn to read when you've spent your career reading faces at checkpoints, the half-second where recognition arrives before words catch up to it. He looked at the screen. He looked at me. He looked at the screen again. Ma'am, can you step out of the vehicle for me? Is there a problem? I said, already unbuckling. Systems flagging the credential for secondary verification. He wasn't rude. He was young and doing exactly what he'd been trained to do, which made it worse, because I knew the training. TSSCI clearance codes don't belong on a card riding in a rental car with a retired corporal and his golf shirt. To this kid, I looked like a stolen badge or a very good forgery, and either one meant he'd just done his job correctly by stopping me. Frank leaned across the seat, delighted. "Oh, now you'll get somewhere," he said to the sailor, loud enough for the cars behind us. "Check her good. She works a desk in Washington. She's not military family. She just tags along with badges she borrows for the parking lot." He laughed, the same laugh from Walt's driveway. Coffee and copy machines, that one. Wouldn't know a real ID if it bit her. The sailor's radio crackled. He said, "Copy," holding one at lane 2, and another sailor jogged over from the shack, older, a petty officer, already reaching for his own scanner to cross-check. I could end this in 4 words. Rear Admiral Amelia Riley. I had said it 1,000 times in briefing rooms, on flight lines, into secure phones at 2 in the morning. Here, in a rental car line with my father grinning at my expense, the words sat in my throat like something swallowed wrong. Say it, and Frank finds out here, at a gate, in front of strangers, and Caleb's day becomes about me. Say nothing, and I stand on the shoulder of a highway in 90-degree heat while my father tells a 19-year-old sailor that his daughter steals parking passes. I said nothing. "Ma'am, I need you to wait here while we verify," the petty officer said, and there was an edge under the politeness now, the edge of someone who has just decided you might be a problem. Behind us, a car door opened. I heard boots on asphalt before I turned around, and Ray was already moving, cutting between 2 idling cars in his civilian jacket with a government sedan badge clipped where I hadn't told him to clip it, because I had never told him to break the order I gave him at the airport. He stopped 3 feet from the young sailor, squared his shoulders, and his voice came out flat and carrying, the voice of a career senior chief who has said this exact sentence in far worse rooms than this one. "Petty officer, stand down. That is Rear Admiral Riley, United States Navy, Commander, Carrier Strike Group. I'm her aide, Senior Chief Osment, and I will confirm that credential personally if your duty officer wants it in writing." The young sailor's hand froze on the scanner. His eyes went from the screen to my face to Ray's ID and back to the screen, fast, like a man recalculating everything he thought he understood about the last 90 seconds. Frank had gone quiet in a way I had never heard him go quiet. Not even the year Caleb broke his collarbone at Fort Benning and the phone rang at 2 a.m. He was still leaning across the seat, mouth half open on whatever joke he'd been about to add, and nothing came out. I turned my head enough to see him, not enough to speak to him. There was nothing I wanted to say to him yet. Not here, not with a line of cars stacking up behind us, and a boy in a guard shack learning in real time who I was. The young sailor straightened so fast his heels clicked. His hand came up, sharp held.
"Mom."
"My apologies, ma'am." I returned it out of habit before I decided to. Frank hadn't moved. He was staring at the salute like it belonged to someone else's life, someone else's daughter, and by the time he found his voice, I had already walked past the shack toward the gate, toward the sound of a marching band tuning somewhere beyond the parade field. "Amelia," he started, but I was already through. The guard behind me still holding his salute, and Frank stood rooted at the shoulder of the road, seeing for the first time in his life a soldier come to attention for his daughter. The parade field had baked under a sun already pushing 90 degrees by 9 that morning, and the heat still clung to my collar as Ray fell into step beside me, then peeled off toward the staff entrance without a word, the way he always did when a job was done, and he needed distance from what it had cost him. Inside, the room smelled like floor wax and gun oil, and underneath that, the ghost of aftershave from 200 men who had shaved twice that morning. Rows of white dress uniforms stretched toward a stage strung with a blue and gold banner. I found a seat in the last row, beside a stack of folding chairs someone hadn't bothered to put away, and I sat with my hands folded the way I'd learned to sit in briefings where I was not supposed to be noticed. Frank was 4 rows from the front. I could see the back of his head, the same haircut he'd had since 1974, tilted toward Diane as he pointed at something in the program. He did not look back once. The band finished tuning. A chaplain gave an invocation nobody heard. Then the adjutant read the graduating class roll, and when he reached Caleb Riley, Frank's hand found Diane's knee and gripped it, and I watched my father's shoulders come up an inch, the posture of a man finally getting what he'd spent 71 years waiting for. Lieutenant General Michael Vance took the podium a little after 10. He was a broad man with a jaw like a doorframe, and his voice filled the room without him raising it. He talked about sacrifice, about the trident these men would pin on that afternoon, about the instructors who'd broken them down on the beach at 0:30 so the ocean could build them back into something harder. It was the speech I'd heard a version of a dozen times at a dozen bases, and I let it wash over me the way water washes over rock. Then he stopped mid-sentence. His eyes had swept the room the way command eyes always do, checking exits, checking faces, and they caught on the last row and held there. On me. "I'm sorry," he said, to no one, to everyone. "I need a moment." The silence that followed had weight. 200 men trained not to fidget did not fidget, but I felt every one of them recalibrate, the way a compass needle swings when true north moves. "Rear Admiral Amelia Riley," Vance said, and his voice had changed, gone low and formal, a command voice now instead of a graduation day voice. "Would you please stand?" I did not move for a second. 20 years of practiced invisibility does not unlearn itself in a heartbeat, even when a 3-star general is looking directly at you. "Ma'am," Vance said, softer now, almost a request, "I commanded a joint task force element under your operational authority in 2011. I would consider it an honor." I stood. For rows ahead, I saw the back of my father's neck go rigid. 2011, Task Force Trident Hellmanned, Vance said to the room, though I understood he was really saying it to one man in the third row who had spent the last 2 days calling me a coffee secretary. "This officer ran the intelligence architecture that got half of you home from that deployment without a scratch. Some of you are alive because of decisions she made at 0300 in a tent with no windows. I do not say that lightly, and I do not say it for her comfort. I say it because you're about to become the kind of men who serve under officers like her, and you should know what that looks like before you salute one for the first time." He straightened, and his voice went to iron. "Detachment, a 10 HUD. The sound was like a wave breaking, 200 chairs scraping back at once, boots snapping together, and every single man in that room turned in his seat to face the last row, chins up, right hands rising to their brows in one motion, so clean it looked rehearsed, though nothing about it had been. I stood very still and returned it, my hand steady at my temple though nothing else in me was steady, because 20 years of secrecy had just been undone in 11 seconds by a man I hadn't spoken to in over a decade. Then, over 200 lowered salutes, I looked straight at my father in the front rows. He did not turn. He did not dare. Somewhere in the graduating rows, I found Caleb's face instead. He was not standing at attention like the others. He couldn't. Tears were running openly down his cheeks, and he made no move to wipe them, just held his salute like every other man in that room, looking at me like he was finally allowed to. Vance held the salute for a long 5 count, then released it. "As you were." The room settled back into its seats in a rustle of fabric and boots, the ordinary sound of an ordinary graduation resuming, and if you had walked in from the hallway right then you would have thought nothing at all had happened. I sat back down last after everyone else. Caleb's name was called again, and this time when he stepped forward, his hand shook so badly the instructor had to steady his collar to pin the trident straight. "Easy, Riley," the instructor murmured, loud enough to carry, and a ripple of quiet laughter moved through the graduates, the kind that breaks tension instead of building it. Diane pressed a tissue to her eyes, already damp since the invocation. Somewhere near me a mother whispered, "That's my boy," to no one, and a father answered, I know," without looking away from the stage. I clapped when I was supposed to clap. I did not look at my father again, and he did not look for me. When the benediction ended and the room rose in a loose, happy crowd, I watched the back of Frank's head turn once, scanning the last row, and find it empty, because I had already stood and stepped into the aisle, the way I'd learned to leave rooms before anyone could ask me to explain myself. By the time I reached the courtyard, the crowd had scattered into knots of families with cameras, and I saw him instead at the far edge of the parking lot, alone, walking toward the rental car with his hands jammed in his pockets and his head down, not waiting for Diane, not waiting for Caleb, not waiting for me. I understood, watching him go, that whatever this cost him, the real conversation hadn't happened yet. It was only just beginning. The rental car door had barely closed before Frank started. You embarrassed me. His hands were on the wheel, 10 and 2, knuckles white against the vinyl. In front of 200 people. In front of a lieutenant general. I kept my eyes on Highway 75 sliding past the window, the base fence blurring into scrub brush and telephone poles. I didn't say a word, Frank. You didn't have to. His voice cracked up an octave, the way it used to before it turned mean. You just stood there, and let him do it. Let him make me look like a fool who didn't know his own daughter. You didn't know your own daughter. I said it quietly. No heat in it. Just fact, laid down flat like a card on a table. He hit the blinker too hard, swung the car onto the shoulder gravel, and slammed it into park. The engine ticked. A gull screamed somewhere over the parking lot behind us. 20 years, he said. 20 years you let me think you were pushing paper. You let me say things. He stopped himself. His jaw worked like he was chewing on something bitter. I let you say a lot of things. I turned to face him. The coffee secretary. The desk job. Vacation with a badge. You called it once. At Christmas. In front of Diane's sister. I didn't know. You didn't ask. There was a version of this conversation I'd rehearsed 100 times in my head, at 30,000 feet, in briefing rooms, in the dark of my apartment off Wilson Boulevard, and none of those rehearsals had prepared me for how small his face looked right now, how much like an old man, and not like the man who used to loom over the dinner table on Delmar Street. I reached into my bag on the floorboard and unzipped the inside pocket where I kept my wallet, my orders, the folded photocopy of my citation. I never showed anyone. My fingers found the photograph first. I'd carried it since 2010. Laminated once at a FedEx office in Ramstein because I was afraid it would fall apart before I found the courage to show it to anyone in this family. Before you say anything else, I said, look at this. I held it out. He didn't take it right away. He looked at my hand like it might be a trick. Take it, Frank. He took it. I watched his eyes move across the image the way you watch someone read a letter that's going to change something. A hospital cot at Landstuhl, sheets the color of old teeth. A woman on it, bandages wrapped from collarbone to ribs, and 4-line taped into the back of one hand, eyes half open and glassy with morphine. A 2-star general, younger than a different man, since retired, pinning 2 silver stars to a gown that didn't even have a proper collar to pin them to. In the corner of the photo, barely visible, a paper cup of institutional coffee gone cold on the rolling tray. That's a hospital, he said. Not a question.
His voice had gone thin.
Landstuhl Regional, Germany. I kept my hands folded in my lap, steady, though under the skin something was climbing my throat. November 25th, 2010. He looked up. Something in his face had already started to understand, and didn't want to. Thanksgiving, I said. The silence in the car went a particular kind of quiet, the kind with weight to it, like the air before a door slams somewhere else in the house. You called that week, I said. You told Mom I was heartless. Said I cared more about my career than my own family, that I couldn't even pick up a phone on a holiday. I let that sit a second. I was on that cot for 9 days. There'd been an operation 2 nights before. I can't tell you the details, I still can't, not fully, not ever, and it went wrong in the last 90 seconds. 3 of my people didn't get on the helicopter with the rest of us. I got on it because a corpsman named Alvarez put me on it, half-conscious, still trying to give orders. Amelia. I couldn't lift a phone that week, Frank. My arm was in a sling and my ribs were wired, and I was on enough morphine that I don't remember most of the 25th at all. I remember the general's voice. I remember the coffee going cold. I don't remember Thanksgiving. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. That's the vacation you meant. That's the vacation with a badge. He was still holding the photograph. His hand had started to shake. Not dramatically, just a fine tremor, the kind you'd miss if you weren't watching for it, the kind I'd learned to read in Wounded Men for 20 years. I said that to you, he whispered. I said that to you, and you were. He couldn't finish it. He set the photograph on the dashboard very carefully, like it might break, and put both hands back on the wheel though the car wasn't moving, and then his shoulders came down and forward, and his forehead met the top of the wheel, and he stayed there. I thought of the parking garage at Lindbergh Field years back, the young attendant squinting at my military ID, asking if the 2 silver stars printed there meant I got a discount, mistaking a citation for a badge, the same way Frank had mistaken 9 days of near-death for a snub. Caleb had known the truth for 2 years by then and had said nothing, out of some loyalty I still hadn't fully forgiven him for. None of that was Frank's to know yet. Not today. The gull cried out again over the empty lot. Somewhere past the guardrail, traffic hissed by on 75, indifferent, going wherever people go on an ordinary Tuesday. "Why?" he said into the wheel, muffled, barely audible, his voice breaking apart on the last word. "Why did you never tell me?" I looked at the back of his neck, at the gray hair cut too short by a base barber, at the tremors still moving through him. "I did tell you," I said. "You just never listened." He didn't say anything else. He just drove, both hands on the wheel like it was the only thing keeping him upright, and I let the silence sit there because I'd learned a long time ago that silence isn't always something you need to fill. 10 minutes later, he took an exit that wasn't ours. "There's a place off Route 9, he said, voice rough. "Diner. Your mother and I used to stop there when we drove down to visit you at Great Lakes. Before you shipped out the first time." I didn't remember him ever visiting me at Great Lakes. I filed that away. The place was called Hank's, a low building with a buzzing sign missing its H, 3 trucks in the lot, and a waitress named Alvarez who called everyone honey, without looking up. We took a booth by the window. The vinyl seat was cracked and cold under my hands. Frank ordered fries and 2 coffees before I could say a word, which told me something. He still remembered what I used to order 20 years ago, back before I became someone he decided to stop knowing. The fries came fast, too hot, steam rising off them. Frank didn't touch his. He turned the little photo, the one from my hospital bed after Kandahar, over in his hands like it might say something different on the back. 9 days, he said. You were in that bed 9 days, and I called it running away from Thanksgiving. You didn't know. I didn't want to know. He set the photo down between the ketchup and the napkin dispenser, careful, like it was something that could still bleed. That's the truth of it, Amelia. I didn't want to know what you'd become. Because if I knew, I couldn't tell myself the story I liked better. I picked up a fry.
Didn't eat it.
Just held it because my hands needed something to do that wasn't shaking. What story was that? That I was still the man in this family who'd done something. He laughed, short and ugly, aimed at himself. 22 months in Da Nang. I came home and nobody wanted to hear about it, and I spent 40 years waiting for somebody to look at me the way they were supposed to look at a man who served. And then my daughter goes and does. He gestured at nothing, at the whole shape of my life he'd refused to see. That. And instead of being proud, I was scared. Scared of what? Of being nothing next to you. He said it flat, no performance in it, and that was how I knew it was real. Frank Riley had never once in my life admitted to fear out loud. So I made Caleb my second chance instead. Easier to be proud of a son who is still becoming something than to be proud of a daughter who already was. Here it was, an open loop I hadn't expected, because I'd never once asked myself the question until he said it out loud. Had he pushed Caleb this hard, this early, for the same reason? I looked at my father's hands, the fry going cold in mine, and wondered how much of my brother's whole life had been built on the same fear. You didn't just diminish me, I said. You used him to feel important. Frank's jaw worked. Yes. No excuse followed it. No, but you have to understand. Just the word, sitting there on the table between the fries and the photograph, more honest than anything he'd said to me in 20 years. I love you, I said. I need you to hear that first, because what I'm about to say isn't about not loving you. I set the fry down. I'm not going to keep shrinking myself so you feel warm, Dad. Not the ID card. Not the coffee. Not letting Walt call me a secretary and smiling through it. That's done. I know. I'm not asking you to fix 20 years tonight. I know that too. He looked up, and his eyes were wet in a way I'd never seen, not even at my grandmother's funeral. I don't know how to start being proud of you. I never built that muscle, Amelia. 40 years of not using it. My phone buzzed against the table before I could answer. Caleb's name on the screen, and under it, a photo of Mom's kitchen. He'd apparently walked straight to her house after the reception, phone in hand, refusing to let this wait. I answered and put it on speaker between the ketchup bottle and the photograph, right where Frank could hear every word. Is he there? Caleb's voice tight. Amelia, is Dad? I'm here, Frank said. There was a pause, and then Diane's voice came through, closer to the phone than Caleb's, unmistakably wet. Frank Riley, you tell her right now what you told me on the phone in 2012. Frank went pale under the diner's fluorescent light. Mom, I said slowly. What did he tell you? That he knew? Diane said, and her voice cracked wide open. Not everything. Not the stars. But he knew you weren't answering a phone at a desk, Amelia, and he made me promise not to ask, and I did, because that's what I always did, and I have spent 14 years hating myself for it. The fries sat between us, going cold, forgotten. Frank stared at the photograph like he was seeing it for the first time all over again. I don't know how to start, he said again, quieter now, to me, to the phone, to all of it. I don't know how to start being proud of you the right way. I looked at him, really looked, past the sunburn and the stubborn set of his jaw and the tremor that hadn't left his hand since Coronado, and something in my chest loosened just slightly, not forgiveness yet, but the first door to it. Frank looked at his daughter. I don't know how to start being proud of you. I smiled. Start by listening. Frank did not answer right away. He picked up a fry, put it back down, and looked at me like a man deciding whether a door was worth opening. Start with what? He said. There's 20 years in there. I don't even know which part to ask about first. Pick one, I said. He picked Kandahar. Not the injury. The part before it, what my team was doing there, who Ray Osment had been to me before he was my aide, why I chose surveillance work in a country where women weren't supposed to run networks. I told him pieces. Not classified pieces. Just pieces. He listened with both hands flat on the table, like he was afraid if he moved them, he'd interrupt. 3 days later, Lindbergh Field smelled like jet fuel and burnt coffee, the way every airport smells at 6 in the morning. My flight to Reagan National boarded at gate 14. Diane hugged me twice, the second time longer than the first, and whispered that she was proud of me in a voice built for someone who'd been rehearsing the sentence. Caleb didn't say anything. He just gripped my shoulder the way seals grip each other before a jump, hard enough to mean it. Frank stood a little apart from them, and that was when I saw the shirt. It was new, still had the fold crease down the front from the plastic packaging. Navy blue, block letters across the chest. Proud father of a rear admiral. He must have ordered it the night we sat in that diner, or the morning after, because there hadn't been time for anything slow. Dad, I said. You didn't have to do that. I wanted people to ask, he said. So, I could tell them. I opened my mouth to say something easy, something to close the distance with a joke. He didn't give me the chance. Frank Riley squared his shoulders, the way I remembered from a photograph I'd seen once of him at 19, and brought his right hand up to his brow. Elbow level. Fingers together. It wasn't perfect, 71 years and 40-some, since anyone had made him hold that position, but it was correct. He held it. Behind him, a woman pushing a stroller slowed down without meaning to, sensing something was happening that she shouldn't walk through. I set my bag down. I brought my hand up and returned it, crisp, the way I'd done it 10,000 times for men I outranked and men who outranked me, except this time my hand was shaking slightly and I let it. We held the salute 3 full seconds. Long enough that Caleb had to look away, blinking hard at the departure board like it had suddenly become interesting. I dropped my hand first, reached out and took my father's, the one that had thrown my ID on a car floor 8 days earlier, and held it instead. Corporal Riley, I said. Not Dad. Not Frank. The rank he'd carried out of a jungle 54 years ago and buried somewhere under 3 decades of feeling like it hadn't been enough. I said it the way Vance had said mine on that stage, like a fact worth stating out loud, in public, where it could be heard. His jaw worked once. He didn't trust his voice, So he just nodded, and that was answer enough. You could have told me sooner, he said finally. About the stars. About all of it. I could have, I said. I didn't think you'd want to hear it from me. I didn't, he admitted. Wanted to hear it and not want it, both at once. That's a hell of a thing to carry around for 20 years. I know, I said. I carried a version of it too. I think for 20 years I told myself my silence was a gift I was giving him, that if he never knew what I carried, he'd never have to feel small standing next to it. I understand now that isn't generosity. It's erasure. You cannot protect someone's pride by disappearing. You can only teach them that your absence is the price of their comfort and call it love. Real respect doesn't ask anyone to get smaller. It stands two people up straight, side by side, and lets them both be seen. I boarded my flight. Somewhere behind me, my father was still standing at the gate in a shirt he'd bought for a version of pride he'd finally learned how to wear.